the US authorities have said they're happy with that, but it's a political move. Most of the Saudis who've been returned to Saudi Arabia were not cleared through these processes at Guantanamo. It was a political deal.
Now, how did you first find out about Hekmati's innocence? Through Carlotta Gall and her work talking to Hekmati's son?
Yeah, I mean, I'd read Hekmati's stories when I was compiling the book because, the book is a detailed study of all the people who took part in the tribunals and the stories that they expressed. And I'd come across them, and I was very intrigued that this man had said, call Ismail Khan. He'd be able to tell you about me because, as I said, Ismail Khan, massively important figure in Afghanistan. So I'd been wondering about that, and then when this news...
Well, let me interrupt you right here. You knew about this, and certainly Carlotta Gall and other people who were looking at Hekmati's case. Did any of the journalists who were looking into this think to call Ismail Khan while Hekmati was still alive in Guantanamo?
Well, what had actually happened was that after he died, that was when I started looking on the internet for the background to the story. I hadn't found anything, and that was when I discovered that Carlotta Gall had interviewed his son before he even went to Guantanamo and told the same story that he was telling. That enabled me to put two and two together. And when I contacted Carlotta, she told me that she had actually been in contact with the family after he had been sent to Guantanamo. And had not followed up on the story. But she was the only journalist in the world, I think, who had any idea of what this story was about. And through both of the elements that we could bring to the story, that's how we came up with it. But no, I don't think anybody else had studied this. And I mean, this is part of the problem with Guantanamo is that to this day, so many of the people that are held there, nobody knows anything about them. Now, one of the missions of my book, which, I think you've read, Lenny, so hopefully you can verify that, is that it tells the story of hundreds of the people in there who we don't know anything about them otherwise. They've never had their stories published in the newspapers. There's nobody banging on the doors of the White House saying, look, there's another innocent guy here. Here's his biography. Why don't you look at his story? Why is he still there?
These stories that are coming out are just are certainly amazing. But is it true that none of the people in Guantanamo have been in touch with their families, or have some of them been in touch with their families? Have their stories gotten out through their families? Do their families even know they're being held in Guantanamo, except for by perhaps the name that they gave when they went in there?
Well, there are some people in Guantanamo who have never had any contact with their families, as far as I'm aware of. There are some people in Guantanamo who have no contact with lawyers. Mostly the way that we find out anything about the people is that they've elected to have legal representation. Now that was something that was fought for a long time, and it hinged on an important Supreme Court decision in June 2004 that they had the right to be represented. But not every detainee in Guantanamo has chosen to have legal representation. So there are certainly people in there that we know almost nothing about. We have no way of knowing whether they've established contact with their family. I mean, the Red Cross, attempts to keep people in touch with their families, but all the reports that we have out of Guantanamo is that the correspondence is very, very sporadic, that the military choose to hold on to things and not pass them on to the detainees without any explanation. And, to go back to Hekmati, one of the sad things that he said the last time that he had a review board was he never heard from his family. He not a word from his family in 5 years. They didn't know where he was. He didn't know where they were, and he died without ever having contacted his family. 5 years, an innocent man.
What has been the response to the article that you wrote, this article?
Well, I think it was very well received by a lot of people. I certainly got some good feedback from it. But what was significant to me was that almost as soon as it came out, the New York Times got in touch with me to say we've discovered that through your website that you're somebody who expresses strong opinions about Guantanamo, and you know that our requirements for reporters are that they are impartial, that they are objective. So we're going to have to publish this retraction to say, not that we're complaining about the quality of the journalism, they stress that they were not complaining about that at all, but that having now understood your stance, we shouldn't have credited you with a byline as the co-author of the piece. Which was, it was quite strange to me, and I was very gratified that people like Scott Horton at Harper's found out about the story and immediately, accused the New York Times of backing down when they should have backed me up on this.
Andy, on that point, what would be an acceptable standard of journalism? We've certainly received criticism for having an opinion, but when the facts lay out atrocities like this and wrongdoing, what would they consider a neutral position as a journalist?
Well, I'll tell you what I think my problem is that I understand that if you're going to try and report and tell both sides of the story, that what makes a difference between having a one-sided story and representing two points of view is that you at least talk to people who represent the opposing point of view. Now, to me, that means...
Let me interrupt you. In this case, what is the opposing point of view?
Well, you talk to the authorities and say, what do you have to say about this? And they usually turn around and say, well, no, that's not true at all. But I mean, at least then you've demonstrated that you've spoken to both parties. I think my problem is that when objectivity is supposed to mean that you're not allowed to have an opinion, what this would mean in practice to me is that although if you work as an op-ed writer, you're supposed to have an opinion, if you work as a reporter, you're not supposed to have an opinion. How would you ever say then write a book? And you can't write a book that has no opinion. It kind of seems crazy to me. And the thing as well is that I felt undermined because it was suggested that I was somehow partisan out of nowhere. Now the reason that I have such profound criticisms of Guantanamo didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a detailed study of the place, after which I concluded that that no reasonable person would be able to suggest that this was a fair and humane and legal system that had been set up. It's an abomination, and I would defy anybody really to have a detailed investigation of what's happened there. Well, we're looking at a maximum of 5% of the people who've been held there who are the truly dangerous people that we're talking about. I defy anybody to look at that and say this has been a success. For each 20 people we've rounded out, we've got one dangerous person. What about the other 19? What have you been doing? It's a failure, it's an abomination, I think.
Andy Worthington, the Guantanamo Files. Thank you for joining us in the INN studio.
Yeah, thanks, Lenny.
Welcome back to the PMS Home Shopping Network. We make shopping easy for fat, lazy, and sex-starved women of all ages. Today we have the George W. Bush Action Figure Fun Set. These 3 great action figures will give your children the George W. Bush presidential experience without actually being elected, just like W himself. Our first action hero is Party Time Bush, featuring a pink polo with an adjustable cool collar and secret cocaine shoe stash. This tiny compartment holds up to 8 grams of Chaz.